Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and we've got a humdinger of a who whistle of a show. I'm really excited about it. This is the first time that I have reconnected with my friend Justin Martell for over a decade. We were asking him the last time we had seen each other in person. It's been a very long time. Now you may not be familiar with this gentleman, but let me give you a little intro. This is a guy that got involved in what I like to call not the truther, but the truth movement before the term truther existed. Not while, he was working a job, and not while he was in college trying to be an activist. While he was in high school, he and the Jackmans started Student Scholars for 9/11 Truth, and they were part of that very first wave of confronting politicians with real questions. It was unbelievable. And from there, Justin has just been so insightful and a source for a lot of little stories along the way, a trusted source. And the other thing I like about Justin is he walks the walk. He doesn't just talk the talk. This is a man who's actually been to North Korea. Now, you and I have a very limited understanding. Most human beings, we perceive things as we know them, as the information comes in. And I'm pretty sure 99.99999% of my audience has never been to North Korea. So with all this, Kim Jong Un is dead. He had a heart attack. Wait, no, he was at a missile testing and everything went bad. No, he's been isolating. And now there's photos and now there's video. So I wanted to get somebody who's been on the inside on the program. Justin, how are you?
Great, I'm doing well, and it's great to be with you here again. I think the last time we did a show together was probably like 2008. So,
you know what? I'm gonna try to dig that up. And he's talking about the original InfoWarrior show, the first show on InfoWars that was not just Alex Jones based. And Martell and Jackman and others were some of my best guests because, again, they were on the ground. Some of these videos with Ron Paul, Barack Obama. I'm trying to think of some of the Joe Biden, Joey B. Apparently the candidate.
We should bring that one back out. I think I was thinking about it recently. I talked to him about Able Danger back in 2007 or 2008, and it was a really interesting, candid exchange, actually.
Yeah, well, that was the thing about Joe Biden when he was sharp. His eyes would open when you would ask him a real question, when he had a brain. This is actually pre him being a vice president, folks. This is when he was a senator. He was running for president. And you're right, just even when he was trying to deny something, such as, the Pakistan stuff with Luke, he was well aware what he was being asked. And you could see the wheels turning. The wheels don't turn as well anymore. You see that Mika Brzezinski interview? That's about the sharpest I've seen him in about 3 months, and we're talking about as sharp as a dull Sharpie, guys. It was not that great still, but for Joe Biden, it was a butcher knife. So, Justin,
he took his vitamins that day.
I feel like they must have woke him up literally 40 minutes beforehand, put him in makeup. I'm not even sure if he had pants on, hit him with a injection of like adrenaline, got him going, and then made sure the cue cards were very readable and large with big letters. But that's just my opinion. Justin, you're well-traveled. First of all, why don't you tell people, outside of Student Scholars for 9/11 Truth, it's not like you've stopped with activism, but, it's not like you're on the ground, but you're very vocal about, I would say, human rights, right? And that's one of the reasons that you wanted to go and experience this for yourself. So tell people how you get into traveling to North Korea for the first time and when you went there.
Sure. I mean, like all Americans, I had a fascination with North Korea, and we all do. I mean, this latest round of news shows how quickly we will eat up any piece of sensational information about North Korea, just because North Korea is so opaque. And this is in large part because of the way and them and how they operate. But it's so opaque that we're pretty much willing to believe anything at this point, whether it's Kim Jong Un fed his uncle to a pack of rabid dogs.
I remember that one.
Yeah. And like the recent rumors of Kim Jong Un's death also originated from an anonymous Chinese source. That's always the popular thread. The anonymous Chinese Communist Party official who gives us this piece of juicy information. But anyway, or whether it's Kim Jong Un had his ex-girlfriend machine gunned, or he blew up one of his generals with an anti-aircraft gun. So I was always intrigued. So around 2013, I started just pretty much reading anything and everything that I could about North Korea, from your sort of like very sensational defector books to the more scholarly Under the Loving Care of the Fatherly Leader by Bradley K. Martin. And I really wanted to go. So I was able to pitch myself because I work in film and TV, and I contacted several tour companies. So actually, let me back up. There's a misconception out there that you can't go to North Korea. And a lot of people say, what do you mean you went there? You can't travel there. The thing is that you can, but you have to go. It's much like China was in the late 70s and in the 80s, where if you wanted to go, you had to go with a pre-approved travel company, or like traveling to the Soviet Union, one of the travel companies that specializes in tours to North Korea. You're obviously there on an approved itinerary. You stay at foreigner hotels. You know, that's the thing. Now, there are people who sort of make that more insidious as it is, and I have a sort of slightly different take on it. But anyway, going back, so I pitched myself as a filmmaker. I said, look, I'd love to travel to North Korea. If you take me, I'll film some video promos for you. And that actually got me in working with Young Pioneer Tours, who I still continue to work with to this day on a variety of projects, because they do travel not only to North Korea, but they specialize in taking you to places your mother wishes you would have stayed away from. So they do travel all over the world. But it all started with North Korea, and I ended up traveling to North Korea several times. And I also lived in Dandong, which is the main Chinese border city with North Korea. I lived in 2017 for a while, right on the Yellow River. When I woke up in the morning, I had not one but two views of North Korea from my apartment. I could watch North Korean radio and TV. So yeah, that's how I got started working North Korea related stuff.
So before we get into your personal experiences, I've talked to you about the DPRK, and most people don't even know what the DPRK is. You say that, it's like, is that the new EPMD van? What is that? What's going on here? Are we going Raven? Obviously not during COVID 1984. So I'd like you to get into that, get into Kim Jong Un's father and grandfather. And, the big thing that we find, is said again and again and again, is that North Korea has starved its own people. And I want to remind everybody before we get there that, hey, we could talk about whatever they're doing. We could talk about censorship. But right now in America, there's censorship everywhere. Everywhere. My channel, folks, I got to say this now in the middle of the video, has been completely demonetized. I need your help more than ever. I've got a link to a Mine's Bounty. I'm also on Rockfin. We're streaming to Twitch at the same time, because voices are totally and completely being erased and unpersoned in America. For instance, I did the Alex Jones sing-along when Alex trended again for saying he may have to eat his neighbors during the lockdown. And one of the things I was looking for was a picture of me and Alex when I had put out Invisible Empire behind a stack of DVDs pointing that I'd posted to Facebook. Well, it's not there anymore. It seems that every picture I took with Alex Jones that was on the internet is now no longer on that platform. So to think that it can't happen to you or it can't happen in this country, it absolutely can. So why don't you give people a little bit of a, again, DPRK, historical perspective of North Korea, what we're told, and then we'll get into your actual experiences.
Right. Well, I think it's important to, first of all, when we talk about things like human rights, we have to talk about them, we have to talk about it like inclusive of everyone. And I'm always, and I think you can really understand this, Jason, I think that we as Americans should be automatically suspicious anytime the government starts peddling the whole human rights issue when sort of talking about things like regime change in a country. Oftentimes they're a smokescreen for another agenda. Now, I don't say that to say that the cause of human rights isn't noble, because it is. I say that because the U.S. government is only concerned about human rights when violations are done by a dictator that's not a friend of ours, right? You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, we saw this with Iraq. You know, human rights were used as a great smokescreen and an excuse for the invasion of Iraq and ultimately toppling the Saddam Hussein government. Libya as well is now used. It's been used as a justification for our actions in Syria. So I'm automatically suspicious, and that's one of the things that really made me want to go. You know, it's like, is this 100% true what we hear about North Korea, or are we ourselves caught in a propaganda game? They have their propaganda. We also have our propaganda. So I wanted to go and sort of and like all things, it's not black and white. It's shades of gray. That's how I like to explain it. In terms of historical perspective, I mean, DPRK is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. After World War II, Korea was split in half at the 38th parallel, with the Western sphere of influence being South Korea and the sort of Eastern sphere of influence being north of the 38th parallel. It's sort of an overlooked fact that during the 60s, after the Korean War, North Korea was for a period of time one of the most developed countries in Southeast Asia. In fact, you know, today you hear about North Korean refugees going to China. In those years, during like the Cultural Revolution in China, they actually had the opposite problem. It was Chinese refugees going into North Korea. And in fact, until the late 70s, before the economic miracle in the South, which, by the way, had its own military dictatorship, the North was actually the more prosperous of the two Koreas. And it wasn't until the late 70s and the 80s that the South sort of overtook the North. In terms of human rights violations, and you say that they starve their own people in order to build nukes, I mean, that is true. But the other thing that we need to look at it is you're looking at a cash-strapped country that is very concerned about its regime survival. So unfortunately, what I often say is that the North Korean people now in 2020 are victims of two things. One, their government's sort of resilience and wanting to survive at whatever cost, but also the Western and also the U.S. effort to undermine their government. Because if the North Korean government weren't so preoccupied with regime survival, you might be looking at a different scenario economically in North Korea. And again, all of this is just my opinion, but those are just my sort of general observations.
So, but let's go back to let's go back to Kim Jong Un's father, right?
Yeah.
When under that regime, especially during the Bush administration, people like John Bolton and other neocons repeatedly not only were going after them, but linking them with Iran and terrorism. You know, he dies, and we have a much
a lot of.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, sorry, you broke.
Oh no,
You broke
I
up
was just
for a
saying
second.
he dies. We get a much younger leader, you know, than we've seen in some time. Obviously, you know, that occurs under the Obama administration, but at least Trump reaches out. You know what I mean? I have a lot of critiques on the Trump administration, but one of the positive things that I've seen is at least his outward ability not to demonize them. That doesn't mean I love Mike Pompeo and God knows what kind of black ops are going on there. But talk about that transition of his father passing, you know, this a culture where, again, it's ruled by bloodline, something I disagree with heavily, but that's the regime, right? And then kind of this transition from the propaganda that we saw under the Bush and Obama administration that was always war, right? They're a threat. They can get a nuclear bomb here. They're going to supply things for Iran, etc. To now a much more eased approach.
Yes, and I've often said that if Trump is right about one thing, it's his approach to North Korea. We should 100% talk to our enemies and people that we don't agree with. I mean, you know, it's funny. And again, you talk about propaganda. You have the mainstream media every time Trump meets with Kim Jong Un. Oh, he's meeting with this horrible dictator. Well, what's the opposite approach? I mean, regardless, words and talking are much better than threats of war and exchanging friendly words. I mean, who cares if Trump in a hyperbolic statement says, "Oh, we fell in love"? You know, that's great. You know, give peace a chance. That's it, man.
I 100% agree with that. And even yesterday, we're getting news, and it's kind of been pulled back a little bit, that there was some kind of a firefight between the North and South Korea. Pompeo's now made a comment on that. It's kind of been backed down. Your experiences are on the ground. So what do you think that we can believe regarding that regime and your experiences there?
Well, I mean, and I've traveled through a large portion of the country. I was not just in, a lot of people, one of the interesting things, a lot of people like to tell me what I experienced before I can even say anything. But I was not just in the capital. I also spent some time up in the northeast of the country, which is actually the most impoverished area and the part that was actually hit hardest during the famine of the 90s. And they say, oh, they control your movements and this and that, and that is true. You do have, if you watch a Vice documentary, they call them government minders. I've always found that yes, you do have guides, and yes, they do report back on what you do and say, and they are there to look after you. However, I've always found that if I treated them respectfully, if I was interested and polite, and not necessarily completely deferential, you can actually talk about quite a bit. You can discuss politics. They want to hear about things that occur outside of North Korea. Now, you can't say Kim Jong. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, oh yeah. Go nuts.
You can't say. You probably don't want to say Kim Jong Un is an asshole. But if you want to debate, I've seen people debate whether North Korea should be able to have nukes, and I've seen North Koreans explain that from their perspective, which is very much from the perspective that I've already said, where they basically, the North Koreans will say, when you bring it up in a casual conversation, they'll look at you and they'll say, no doubt repeating propaganda that they've read, but I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with this perspective, where they say, well, if you look at Gaddafi and Saddam and all these other people who traded in their nuclear weapons program for better relations with the West, do you think that we would be so foolish as to give up ours without a single concession from the United States? And from their perspective, that's correct. Now, that's not saying necessarily that they should have them. However, they do have them, and now we must deal with the situation as it exists. And going back to what you said about President Trump, a lot of people want to deal with the world as they wish as it were. So you have all these politicians who say things like, it's totally unacceptable for North Korea to have nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation, and we will not engage with them as long as they continue to proliferate nuclear weapons. Well, sorry, but they will continue to do it, and they have them. So Trump is dealing with it as it exists, and that is actually the sane approach. Even Bernie Sanders agreed with Trump on that. Now, going back to my experiences on the ground, I think the biggest misconception is just that there isn't life there. I think that people have this, see it as almost like hell on earth, when in fact, the vibe on the ground, at least that I experienced it, was very calm, almost like going back in time, very laid back. Life just seemed very slow, especially outside of the capital. Like you would see in a villages and in a developing country anywhere, whether you're in India, whether you're in rural parts of China, it has a similar vibe. And I think there's also this thing where they think there's people lying around starving and dead bodies floating down the river. I mean, I saw more abject poverty in places like India than I ever saw in all of North Korea. And now, again, people said things like, well, yeah, of course that's what you saw because they only showed you what they wanted you to see. But on the other hand, this developing nation that's one of the poorest in the world, yeah, while they may take you to the places that they want you to see, it's not a Truman Show experience where they completely create a whole smoke and mirrors stage show around you. As you travel through the country, you travel through all kinds of villages and you see all kinds of stuff. Now, sometimes they might tell you not to take pictures, but you definitely see, I guess, the real North Korea if you spend any considerable amount of time there.
Wait, are you telling me that the James Franco movie wasn't accurate? Whoa!
It was slightly inaccurate. Believe me.
Slightly? Just a little bit inaccurate, you think?
Yeah.
I want to talk about Kim Jong Il for a little bit. because he had a pretty long reign. That was pretty much the person that while I was getting into politics, I was familiar with. Do you believe because his son was a little bit more westernized that that's one of the reasons that we've actually been able to have some diplomacy with this administration, or do you think it's just based on this administration's willingness to talk and deal? In other words, if the Obama administration had reached out or the Bush administration had reached out in the same manner the Trump administration did to Kim Jong Il, would we see a situation now where maybe they would be lifted up like a South Korea? And do you see in the future now with this relationship that possibility?
Well, I think that actually, if we go back, I think that North Koreans actually have been very much willing to talk throughout all of this, especially after the end of the Cold War, because that's actually when they really ratcheted up sort of this all the nuclear proliferation and everything. And we had Jimmy Carter go during the first North Korean nuclear crisis and meet with Kim Il Sung, Kim Jong Il's father, before he passed away. I think that we cannot. There's a couple different questions you asked within there, so let me try to unpack it. I think that we cannot hold Kim Jong Un to the same standards as his father, or think that he is coming from the same place as his father. And here's the reason why. Kim Jong Il inherited power when his father died in 1994. And yes, he had been long designated the successor and was probably actually running the country long before then. But he inherited power at a time when he was in his 50s, already in poor health, and North Korea was in a steep economic decline that actually led to the famine. So it was actually in his best interest to sort of maintain the status quo, not take any real chances, so that the regime didn't collapse before he passed away. Now, though what you said and why I think that they've always been willing to talk. So actually, what you're saying is sort of very similar thing as to what Trump is doing now occurred actually in the twilight of the Clinton administration. I don't know if you remember, but Madeleine Albright went over and met with Kim Jong Il in a big summit, and that was actually following the first inter-Korean summit with Kim Dae-jung, the then president of South Korea, and his Sunshine Policy when he went to Pyongyang and met with Kim Jong Il. So actually, in the late 90s and early 2000s, we actually saw some opening up and some willingness to talk. Now, the Clinton administration, under the assumption that Gore was going to win the election, actually made a sort of a nuclear deal with North Korea that was a freeze and an eventual dismantlement of their nuclear program. When the Bush administration came in, and especially after September 11th, when the neocons were really looking to cement this
axes of evil,
I guess, push their yes, when they were looking to push the axis of evil narrative, they alleged that North Korea was in violation of that nuclear deal when there actually really wasn't a lot of evidence for it. The main evidence for it actually came from a meeting between Bush administration and North Korean officials. And according to the Bush administration, they said that the North Koreans admitted to a secret uranium enrichment program. When the North Koreans said, no, that was a translation error. We said that we had the right to pursue one if we wanted to. But from that, basically, that led to John Bolton and the neocons essentially totally destroying the Clinton, the framework that the Clinton administration put into place, and that pretty much brought us back to square one. Now, however many years later, with North Korea having even more nuclear weapons, and the Trump administration essentially repeating what had been done at the end of the Clinton administration.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I want to go back to your personal experiences because a lot of people are going to say, well, how much freedom did you have to communicate with others and see what was going on in the outside world via the internet, via your phone conversations, via the media that was there? In other words, the television and radio broadcasts. Were you completely isolated from Western media, or what is it like there? Is there an intranet? What is the experience when you're there?
From what I understand and what I saw, they do use an intranet, and of course, most North Koreans have cell phones. It's a Korea link cell phone, and it's their, it doesn't work outside of North Korea, but that's how the majority of North Koreans communicate. You can, if you do spend a considerable amount of time there, foreigners that are there quite often have access to foreigner SIM cards, which actually do have uncensored internet and I think 3G internet access. There are, I think, one or two places in Pyongyang where you can also access Wi-Fi in like hotel lobbies and things like that. Now, that does not mean that average people have access to those things. And also in foreigner hotels in Pyongyang, you do have Al Jazeera and, some outside news sources that come in. Again, that's filtered through the foreigner hotels, though. If you go anywhere outside of the capital, you just have Korean Central TV, which is fine while you're there. It's quite entertaining.
So in other words, there's just no way that you and I could really communicate via the internet while you were there, even today.
No, I could make an expensive phone call and call you, but yeah, I mean, unless you have a foreigner SIM card in your phone, a Korea Link foreigner SIM card, then I could totally communicate with you. But again, they're kind of expensive, and they're really only worth buying if you're a foreigner who's there often.
All right, so now let's move on to your perspective about this latest incident, I guess you could call it. I remember back when we were really just waiting on the coronavirus to hit the United States before any of the lockdowns. North Korea was kind of brought into the media picture as, possibly being the next place to get hit hard. And then you go into April and Kim Jong-un basically disappears from the public eye. Then the rumors swirl around. What's your take on what was going on there? Was he isolating? Obviously, you believe the pictures and video 100% prove that he's out there. What do you think his next move is going to be now that he has surfaced? And I'd also like to get your perspective on what would happen if he were to pass away, because his only sibling right now, after the murder of his half-brother, is a female. Do you think that culture would embrace a female great leader?
Okay, so I want to just preface all of this by saying that I have, even having traveled there, I have no particular access to special information. This is all my opinion, and we're technically in the realm of conjecture here. But I try to. One of the things that having gone there has helped me to do is be able to stay away from the sort of sensational type of thinking that people tend to lean towards when we talk about North Korea stuff, where like almost anything is possible. Where I hear that, oh, that's not. I hear a horse galloping. It must be a zebra. No, it's a horse. So what I'm going to say about it is, again, going back to this thing where I think because North Korea is so opaque, we're willing to believe anything. And again, we've seen this time and time again with, the crazy story about the uncle being fed to dogs, the executed ex-girlfriend who reappeared on TV, generals who have been reported killed and then reappeared. So I've talked to actually some of the team that traveled with Dennis Rodman when he made his trips to actually meet and hang out with Kim Jong-un. And I guess there was an incident at a dinner meeting where they ended up at a table with one of the generals who had been reportedly executed. And I guess they made a joke, oh, it's great to see you here alive and well. And I guess the North Korean top brass kind of laughed and joked and said that they actually got a kick out of proving the Western media wrong. And from their perspective, that kind of makes sense. So I think that they definitely keep tabs on this stuff and watch it. And I think that they sort of like the idea of discrediting the Western media, U.S. intelligence, South Korean intelligence, when these sort of stories get out and they can prove them wrong. Now, in terms of what I think was happening, yes, so everybody was reporting about the fact that Kim Jong-un was not at the Day of the Sun, which is the biggest holiday in North Korea. It's basically North Korean Christmas. April 15th is the birthday of Kim Jong-un's grandfather and the founder of the North Korean state, Kim Il-sung. So I would say that is abnormal, would be abnormal in any other time. But again, since North Korea doesn't provide any hard data on how COVID-19 affected the country, we can't really look at it as if it were a normal time, because people were saying, oh, well, that would technically be considered blasphemy if he did not attend the celebrations of his grandfather's birthday. Well, first of all, he's Kim Jong Un. He's the supreme leader, so I'm pretty sure he gets a pass if he doesn't attend whatever, what he decides he's not going to attend. And again, we can't look at it as if it's normal times. One of the most solid pieces of information that came out, when that, of course, was sort of ignored when everybody was saying, when we were hearing he was dead, he was a vegetable, he had a heart operation, etc. He was injured at the rocket launch. There was a website called 38 North, and they do a lot of North Korean watching just through satellite imagery and things like that. And they came out and they said, well, there are these reports, but we are actually seeing Kim Jong-un's train in Wonsan, which is where he has one of his main compounds. And that was actually probably the most solid piece of information. And that's likely he was self-isolating there. I mean, I think now I'm in conjecture. Mm-hmm. But I think he was just staying out of the public. He likely has preconditions. You look at, he's 300 pounds, 5'7", heavy smoker. And there are also rumors that some people within the top brass of the North Korean elite and government have come down with COVID. So he probably didn't want to be around it.
And you saw how the Iranians inner circle, high-level military officials, high-level government officials there, a lot of them died in a short period of time, and that kind of put them in the position to agree with China and come out publicly and say that this could have been a U.S. bioweapon. Don't say that on the internet unless you're Fox News and you want to say it's the Wuhan lab. But I'm just saying, that was out there. How dare I report the news? I want to get back to that next question, though. You've been around the culture. Let's say that he does, you said it, he's out of shape. He's a little guy. He's a heavy smoker. Obviously, he's a political target. I still don't trust Mr. Pompeo or Gino Haspel or anybody like that. If they're, and the United States actually commented on this just yesterday, said they had an emergency plan if Kim Jong-un were to go down. What do you think happens? Who's the next leader?
Well, the military, of course, has a million contingency plans. They have the Mission Impossible, 007 scenario where they're going to go in and get the nukes. That's never going to happen. Of course, the U.S. and South Korea have plans for technical invasions of the North. I don't think that that's going to happen, at least anytime soon. And, I just wanted to just sort of put as a cap on what we were talking about with the Trump administration's relationships with. I think that if Trump was following his gut and that he was not listening to some of these neocons that he has in his administration, we'd actually be a lot further in the whole North Korean diplomacy process, which is kind of stalled for the time being. Now, coming back to your question, in terms of succession, that's the territory of wild speculation, because the truth is nobody knows. If you look back at Kim Jong Il, he had various people, because it wasn't always meant to be a dynasty, and it was actually the first, I guess, in communist history. And so before Kim Jong-il assumed power or was designated the heir to Kim Il-sung, there was all kinds of talk of other party officials, Kim Il-sung's brother, Kim Yong-ju. So there was actually, and also Kim Jong-il's brother, Kim Pyong-il. So there's actually a whole sort of like power, it took Kim Jong-il actually many years to sort of consolidate his power and get himself designated as the heir apparent. I don't think it was as difficult with Kim Jong-un. I'm sure that sort of Kim Jong-il sort of picked him as a successor, especially when you look at the fact that his other brother, Kim Yong-nam, was never going to be leader. He's since been assassinated. And I know that Kim Jong-un has another brother, Kim Yong-chol, who I think does not have much interest in leadership. So yes, in terms of family members who are in government and visible, Kim Yo-jong seems to be the likely choice, but I think you never know.
Is that the female?
Yeah, that's the female, yeah.
So do you think, again, I mean, you're there. Do you think culturally that works?
Well, it's interesting because yes, it is a very patriarchal society when you're mixing things with, sort of, East Asian culture, but also communist. which also, when you
Oh, we may have
think
just
there's
lost
actually
you.
a great emphasis on.
You're back. You just froze up for a second. Go ahead.
Okay. I was saying, so yes, okay, you have the patriarchal sort of worldview of East Asian culture, but then you also do have the sort of communist ideology of integrating women into the workforce and into government and things like that. So I don't know. That's hard to say. I felt that I mean, we could get into a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of things that you read about North Korea that in the current North Korean economy, with the free market actually gradually taking hold, that it's actually women who are emerging as the breadwinners in their families and things like that. I encourage you to Google some articles and information that's out there about that. So I think it's very possible. Again, we get into a thing of nobody knows. Very well, the North Koreans could well accept Kim Yo Jong as a female leader. They very well might not. I think that the North Korean public would. Let me put it this way: by the time it's decided, the North Korean public is going to go with whoever emerges as the successor. So whether it's Kim Yo Jong, I don't think would necessarily be questioned by the public, at least outwardly. Or if it's, let's say, a hardliner in the military or a general who would emerge in his place. But I think that it would, even if it was a general or a military person who actually emerged as the leader, I think that it would be well within their best interest to keep a Kim in power, even if it's just like
puppeting.
Yeah, even if it's just a puppet or just as like a nominal head of state. And I've often said for a long time, people have asked me, well, what would you, how would you advise if you were an advisor giving the North Koreans advice? What would you say? And I've said for a long time, I would say get the Kims out of government. I would say you look at like the model in like Thailand, where you have the king and the royal family that essentially isn't involved in government, but are highly revered and loved by the people. And that's what I would say in North Korea. I would say to pretty much remove the Kims from government, put into place a more democratic system that allows for, almost Chinese-style reforms and opening up. And that's the way you could also preserve the Kim legacy, which I know they're very concerned about. So that would actually be, I think, the most ideal situation.
Very interesting stuff with Justin Martell, who, again, he's been in the game for a long time behind the scenes, folks. And he's somebody's opinion that I value a lot. If there's one more thing about North Korea you could leave my audience with, what would it be?
I would say that 75% is that of what you hear in the mainstream media is not true, especially anything purporting to talk about daily life in North Korea. But the 25% is still enough for it to be a crazy but also fascinating and interesting place that I believe deserves to be engaged and encouraged to reform and open up, rather than isolated and kept in a box and sort of kept as this sort of like volatile ticking time bomb. And we should not dismiss, in other words, we should not buy into the usual U.S. propaganda about human rights and things like that, especially as a pretense for war. Because if you look at the history of all those things, that's usually a smokescreen for something else. So do your own research and don't believe everything you hear.
Justin, I can't thank you enough for this. I'm so glad that you reached out and you were willing to do this. We got to have you on again, and hopefully it won't be another 11 years before I see you in person. You're still, you're down in New York City mostly, but right now you're still East Coast, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so hopefully I can get together with you and the Jackman brothers, and maybe we can do some live streaming and some drinking and have a good time after all this COVID 1984 nonsense.
I would love that.
I would love it too. All right, brother. Thank you so much for joining me. It's Justin Martell, everybody. Great guest. I'm so glad that I was able to reconnect with him. If you like firsthand information. Again, I can't give it to you. I've never been there in North Korea. Luckily, I do get sources. Consider supporting me. I do want to say, Christopher Melendowski, thank you so much for that big support last night. Woke up to that. Was so happy to see it. Thank you again. And guys, I'm going to put this in here. This is the Minds Bounty link. I'm trying to get Bill Ottman on the show, the founder of Minds, but I am on Minds.com. This is in the description as well. If you are watching this and you're not paying attention to live chat, it's at the top of the chat as well. And guys, rockfin.com/Jason Burmis. If you endorse me at $9.99 a month, I'm back to five a week. 5 exclusives on this channel that you're not going to get anywhere else. rockfin.com/Jason Burmis. Last night, I put up yet another exclusive, a 25-minute speech by Gavin McInnes. We've got the Michael Flynn Jr. speech up there as well. Tomorrow, we'll be streaming live at noon for free, so you don't need to be a premium member. You can go sign up right now and follow me. I'd love to get to 4,000. Sign up now, follow me, and then at noon tomorrow for free, we do an exclusive, and I'm going to be with Jackson Fax, doing an interview there, talking about some of the esoteric stuff. I know a lot of you love the occult symbolism that's out there involved with the elites. Remember, I'm also now on Twitch. I need you to thumb this video up, subscribe, and share. Who knows how much longer I'm going to be on YouTube? I got some news for you. I might be a little too hot for some of the podcasts out there. I know a lot of you were looking forward to me being on Sean Atwood, and I'm just saying that I don't know whether that's going to happen. And it's not a knock on Sean, but apparently Jason Burmis is really, really dangerous right now. I talked to my buddy Gary Franchi last night. He was kind of jaw on the floor when I mentioned that southfront.org had also had their channel taken down along with David Icke. They're not getting a ton of press. In fact, I'm going to reach out to those guys as well and have them on the channel. And hopefully I'll have them on the channel discussing the censorship there. So I want to remind everybody I'm also a documentary filmmaker. Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, and New World Order to Find and Shade the Motion Picture are all free right here, right now in the documentaries playlist section. So go check them out. And guys, I just want to say thank you for joining me. I love you, and I'll see you all on the flip side.